Okay. So, so this part of the presentation, I will be looking at the investigator section of the GCP, and I'd like to spend just a few minutes to review, start with the definition of investigator and have a quick overview of investigators' roles and responsibilities when conducting human research. And then I would like to spend some more time going through a couple of examples, sort of to show your involvement as a research coordinator, research manager, wherever you are, that your role actually could make huge impact and positive changes to the investigator's performance, investigator engagement throughout the study, as well as obviously which leads to the overall success of your study. So this is sort of an opening question to ask to all of you and to myself as well. As we talk about this, I want you to sort of think about your working relationship with your investigator and how you are communicating with your team members, as well as obviously investigator is one of your team members. So have that question back of your mind, and we can come back to that towards the end of this section, and then we can talk a little bit about it. And if there's any uh, personal or experience situations and stories that you would like to share with us, and have any tips and advices, feel free to stop me and we can talk about it, and it'll be really interesting to hear as well. So this is a sort of a definition of investigator, and investigator is a person who's responsible for the overall conduct of the study at the site level, and that includes, of course, protecting the rights and welfare of the human research subjects and ensuring the validity and integrity of the data that are being collected throughout the study. The sponsor, you will see that term quite a bit as well, obviously. A sponsor of the study could be an individual, company, institution, or organization that takes responsibility for the initiation, management, or financing of the clinical trial. So, as you know, there are a couple of different terms being used to define investigator depending on the country regulations. So, for example, FDA, you'll see, I think PI, sub-I, but when you look at Health Canada, there's no mention of PI, sub-I. Instead, there's a term called qualified investigator. So if we look at ICH definition of investigator is a person responsible for the conduct of the trial at a trial site. And if a trial is conducted by a team of individuals at a trial site, the investigator is the responsible leader of the team and may be called principal investigator. And also mentions a term called sub-investigator, which is any individual member of the clinical study team designated and supervised by the lead or the principal investigator PI at a study site level to perform critical study related procedures or to make important decisions related to study. So medical decision would be one of them. So you'll see sub-investigator could be associate residents or research fellows. Okay. So this is a list of investigator responsibilities that are mentioned in GCP. As you can see, they're quite extensive, and it pretty much covers all aspects of a clinical research operation. If you look at section 4.1, which discusses the investigator qualifications and agreements. So the investigator is the person ultimately responsible for the conduct of the study and has a primary responsibility of protecting the patient's rights, safety, and welfare. So it's important that the PI, the investigator, is qualified to conduct the study. So what they mean by qualified investigator is that the investigator must demonstrate that he or she has the education, training, and experience to conduct the study. There is evidence of a qualification, which could be demonstrated through documents such as CV, training certificates, meeting minutes or presentations, and so on. And there's the investigator must demonstrate awareness of GCP and the regulatory requirements, and also required to be familiar with the study protocol, investigator brochure, and the use of IP, the investigational product, as applicable. And not only is it important for investigator to be qualified by training, education, and experience, the investigator must also ensure that study team members are delegated study-related tasks and duties that are properly qualified, competent, trained, and understand how to do these tasks. So delegation of authority and delegation of a task is obviously, it is acceptable, but as I mentioned earlier, the overall responsibility always remains with the investigator of the study at the site level. Other responsibility I would like to mention would be the adequate resources. So investigator must demonstrate that there is adequate resources to conduct the study, something like having a suitable research patient population to recruit study patient population. Also having a time commitment of investigator. So there's this, investigator is willing to make that time commitment to spend time and work on the study. And having adequate facilities or involved department supports will be also one of them, or having a qualified staff team members to support the research operation will be important as well. Other things we're looking at here would be informed consent of the research subjects, randomization, unblinding, of course, if there is a such part in the study protocol, providing medical care for the research subject will be important. Yeah, so like I said, investigator is the person who's responsible for almost everything that happens during the clinical research study. So here, I just want you to kind of switch things a little bit, and I just want to kind of look at it differently, how to say that, this is a list of common non-compliance issues that are found through Health Canada inspection. And if you look at them, there's a lack of investigator oversight, insufficient study staff training, protocol deviation, non-compliance to GCP, discrepancies between source documents and case report forms, failure to reconsent participant after protocol amendment. These are all the common non-compliance that are discovered by Health Canada. So, as you have probably noticed, all these findings do fall under the umbrella of investigative responsibilities. And, they are obviously the major findings. So what are we looking at here? So here I want to ask you and myself as well that what can we do in your role to improve the situation here? What can you do as a research coordinator, research manager, research nurse to help my research team and investigator to work more efficiently and avoid future non-compliance? So that will be really should be the focus of this session as we are reviewing investigator responsibility in GCP. So I wanted to kind of go through just a couple of examples of it. So let's talk about a little bit about the lack of investigator oversight. So unfortunately, we see this is a pretty common finding, I would say, that there is quite often there's a mention of a lack of investigator oversight that it's mentioned during monitor inspection or Health Canada inspection. So question that we would like to ask would be, what do you do in your daily work to make sure that there is sufficient investigator oversight? What kind of processes and procedures are in place so that, you're making sure that there is your PI's involvement throughout the course of your work and throughout the course of the study operation. So let's look at something like protocol amendment. Is there a process or a procedure that is agreed and that's documented process, I would say, that, that all your members, including your investigators, are well aware of, that follow to make sure there's investigator oversight. So what I see often is that when there is update on protocol or update on IB, let's say, or even safety report, and I think most of us know that those things need to be reported or submitted to our ethics board, and which you do. But having coordinator or someone, regulatory person, to compile all the paperwork and submitting to ethics is not sufficient to say that there was investigator oversight. What we would like to see is that the actual investigators' involvement. So that could be something like, actually going through the amendment or the summary of amendment during your research meeting and have everyone document the training record, including investigator, or having an even email communication to talk about the summary about the amendment, what changes have happened. So I actually want to see the traces of paper trail and some sort of a signature or acknowledgement from investigator to make sure that there was an involvement of active involvement of investigator. So that will be one way of applying that. The other one is failure to reconsent patients after protocol amendment. So it I'm sure most of you already have this sort of some process in place in your unit. And one thing I would like to highlight here is what do you do in case of failure? So let's say for some reason reconsenting patient was missed, which could happen in reality. Things happen. Some days are busier, or some could happen. There's a mistake, and things happen in life. And more important thing is that how would you go about identifying the root cause of it? So what's the root cause and how did this happen? We could simply brush off and say, oh, this was just one time error that I was just tired, I missed it. But you know what, maybe it's worth kind of really thinking about it and talking about it as a group, um, to kind of go over the current practice to see if there's any area that we can actually change a little bit and could improve our practice. So those are, try to come up with the root causes. What are the reasons why as to this happened? And then what can we do differently to mitigate future error, and go even beyond to that? Can we establish something internally to talk about the management of um, different process that we just came up with? Things like that would be something that you guys can discuss as a group. When we say quality control, quality management, it sounds like a really big word, but in reality, maybe it just means simple checklist, or could mean that, one page flow chart, flow sheet, these simple things that could actually make things a lot easier and help the process. So, it doesn't have to be anything extensive or crazy, but could be simple changes that, that may just the do the trick, I would say. Yeah. The other one is protocol deviation. So deviations happen, throughout the study. And the more important thing again would be trying to make an effort to periodically to go back and review the nature of the deviation, or to look at try to find the trend of the deviation. And again, this is not to say to point fingers at anybody. It's more of having a research group, including your investigator, be involved in the process, operation pros wise, and then see kind of look at the trend of it and look at the deviation, and get your investigator involved in the discussion to say, this has happened and we decided to do this, and what are your thoughts on it? Because after all, investigator is one of your research team members, and he does have a significant role, I would say, to play, and he can give you a different perspective in terms of how he does his job. So it can only help everybody to have more ideas and opinions and different perspectives. So try to have that open discussion and to improve your process. Last couple of slides here. I recently attended this conference called the Magi Clinical Research Virtual Conference, and one of the sessions that really interests me was called Working with a Difficult Investigator, and it said failure modes, root causes, and practical solutions. Um, you know, I mean, everyone has different experience with working with different investigators, and some are good, some may not be as good. There are certainly different, many factors that play into that role. And big question the session had was that, engaging investigator without overloading them, because, the reality is that, our investigators and doctors, they do have a lot of workload and they are busy people. And how do we, but then, and yet, as a PI for your project, you need to get them engaged. And how do we do that without overloading them? So it's communication is a key factor, obviously, and but there's other factors that need to be considered as well. So one being investigator experience. Working with an investigator who has years and years of research experience will be completely different from someone who's coming brand new with no previous research experience. Will be completely different. And the ideas about the clinical trial or clinical research will be completely different too. And another factor will be time availability, obviously, and also the research staff availability. Um, how many hours per week or per month can you actually get your investigator actively involved in doing other, even some of the administrative staff that you need to communicate with them. You have to think about that as well. Personality is a big too, obviously. I mean, we're all humans, and you kind of need to kind of learn the other person, as your investigators as well as your, research team members, to figure out what would be the most effective way to communicate one another. So there's multiple factors at play. Bottom line here, though, is that, if investigators combined with team support really only leads to more engaged investigators. That's really the key thing that I took away from that session. Um, I thought I would kind of list some of the practical tips that you may want to consider when, maybe, I'm sure a lot of you are already kind of doing this, a lot of these things that I've already mentioned here, but I put it up hoping that some of this could kind of spark some ideas for your current situation, and feel free to add to this list, and or disagree if you have a different point of view. I welcome that as well. So first is obviously the communication, and how do you communicate with your team members as well as your investigators is really important. Think about the frequency, how often you communicate, and what, through which mode. Is it mainly the email, or in person, or over the phone even? And how much time do you spend communicating? Also, some of the strategies and what are the effective ways to do it. Some doctors do not check email or don't have time to check email and respond very often. Then you might want to consider different ways to communicate with this person. Obviously, you want to document everything. And also, early on, if you are taking on a new project with a new investigator, let's say, I think it's really important to have um, discussion about, to make sure that everyone understands expectations. So I personally ran into a situation where, I happened, this was years ago, not in Horizon, but I happened to work with this investigator who was brand new to research world, and I was relatively young in my career as well. But, we were very motivated on what we do, and he wanted to, create his research team and grow, and it was all great. He had some funding to get it started, but it turns out that, unfortunately, his expectation about my role was completely different from what I had imagined. So different expectations from different people could create some conflict or challenge later on. So it's really important you be really specific and clear on what you imagine your role is going to be, and what he or she think of that expectation is. And when you are communicating, try to be really specific, clear, and consistent, and think of the ways that you can actually, I mean, different PIs would have different needs, I want to say, or different assistant levels, I should say. So, for example, when I was working in oncology, when I was called to be involved in screening assessment, let's say, I wouldn't just print out the screening assessment forms and and then just go to the clinic and expect that I'll just fill out the chart. No, that wouldn't happen. Um, or if there is protocol update, let's say, I'm not going to just print out the protocol amendment, hand it over to the doctor to say, oh, this is the updated version. I mean, you could do it, What I prefer to do though is that I would actually do my homework ahead of time. Just say I would pre-flag the ones or highlight the ones that may interest my PI and present it to him saying that these are the key changes that has happened and I thought I would let you know. So that way, it saves the PI's time and most doctors have really appreciated that sort of summary and update, and as well as when you're seeing patient as well too. And I mean, I'm not the one who's making decision when it comes to medical decision, but at the same time, if I can kind of sort of pre-screen some of the key highlights about that particular patient and bring it to that PI, that really saved time for a lot of staff there. So little things like that could make a huge difference. And again, allocate time to meet and review your progress and goals. I know, it's not always easy to, find a time for your PI to meet with you, but you can do is that maybe schedule in regular meeting time, let's say once a month even or twice a month, and send that invites and to make sure that it's in his calendar. And that way, even if it end up being moved or canceled, it's there that he knows that there is a time being put aside for research work. So that, yeah. The other thing is to find key milestones and metrics, celebrate achievements. I'm sure different research groups have a different goals and milestones to celebrate, and try to be really specific. And little success could really motivate the team as well as your investigator. So those are some of the things that you might want to consider. And again, obviously, reminder email could really be helpful. Yeah, so that's all I have in terms of my slide presentation. But have any questions?
I see Rana has her hand up, Stella.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, go ahead, Rana.
Sorry, that was by mistake. I pressed something and I'm sorry about that.
Well, you're gonna
That's
have to
okay.
ask something
So
now.
sorry.
No problem. Okay, anyone has any questions? Any comment? Oh, okay. Um,
I guess I can add, so on that Theranos trial thing, something that's made me aware. Well, actually, I have a question did come to mind a few slides ago. I know this section, you're focusing on the investigator responsibilities, but in terms of the protocol deviations, it's important for the sponsor to also be aware, right? That those are all being taken care of, as delegates, right? Wouldn't you say?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what's typically done is that, you keep a running log of protocol deviation, um, and that eventually, the study sponsor would like to see that. But I think more that what they're more interested is that what you do with a deviation. What will be the action plan moving
Okay.
forward to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So that would be the
Okay.
more of their interest.
So
Yeah,
like
and
Um,
a kappa SOP?
it could be that, yes, yeah.
it could be. And just to expand, like, and that's exactly right, Stella. And the other thing you want to think of is to keep in mind is that there are two types of deviations. There's minor and major. So the REB is really interested in deviations that have the potential to directly impact the safety and welfare of the participants.
Yeah.
So those things are reportable. The REB has established their own parameters for reporting deviations, and that's in our SOPs. But yeah, the sponsor typically will ask you and say, "What's your REB's SOP on reporting deviations?" Because if you got, if you think about it literally, if there is a visit that is supposed to be done plus or minus 2 days, and you've got them in at plus or minus 5 days, that's a protocol deviation.
Okay.
Or it's an alteration in study plans. So how do you plan on capturing and reporting that? Do they want to do it every 6 months and submit them. So it's to have that, to refer to the RAB SOPs, but really it's the RAB's perspective. To keep this in mind, the RAB's perspective is always the right, safety, and welfare of the research participants. So if it's, sorry, it's a little loud in here. If it's going to affect their safety, or if it's information that that they need to know to make an informed decision to stay, then that's the stuff that's first and foremost your priority in reporting.
Okay,
But
thank
sponsors know it as well, and they can grant waivers too. So if you need if you know that you're not going to meet something and you need a waiver of protocol, that's something that the sponsor can agree to, and then you can submit that to the RAB as well.
Okay, thanks.
Right. It would be like sometimes there's a planned deviation due to circumstances,
Yep.
and that's when you sort of have that discussion with the sponsor, and how that's going to impact patient safety, and that's at which point RAB would need to be notified, and that will make the assessment. And like Jacqueline said, their RAB's focus first priority was going to be patient safety.
Yeah.
Yeah, now
Um,
if you, with that planned deviation though, if you have to ask for that, wouldn't REB just say, well, I think you need to do an amendment, maybe?
No,
Like,
I mean, not
necessarily.
If it's something that's recurring, right? So
okay.
if they're saying, look, you've asked for this waiver 10 times, why don't you just
Oh.
expand the visit window? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then, yeah, so if it's something that keeps happening, then you might have to look at, altering the protocol plan and submitting an amendment. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, one
Just-
example. Oh, sorry.
Stella, go ahead. Yeah, I was
Yeah,
just going
well,
to add.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, for planned deviations, I think we usually have to reach out to the sponsor first, especially the investigator can reach out when the safety is questionable there in order to make sure that the patient is safe. And we got to get approval from sponsor first and then submit the deviation to REB. That's how we go through that. And some situations, there's no time for it. And then the physician makes a decision, does it, but immediately both sponsor and REB to be notified. I also want to add that whenever we submit the deviations, they're categorized, major, minor, and also the deviation form also collects other information like corrective action and risk assessment and all these whenever we are submitting these deviations. So it's kind of getting back to Sarah, when you said CAPA SOP. So kind of the template that we use has all these things that we need to answer.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Carrie, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thanks, I did. Really interesting session. Thank you very much for this. One question I had, Stella, you brought up some interesting information around the investigator's responsibilities. And I guess taking a step back even further is, I'm just looking, I guess, if someone has any good tools around like a feasibility assessment. So, when you're actually, I guess, coming from more of a sponsor / monitor perspective, kind of getting into a situation or picking the right people beforehand to make sure that that relationship is very good. So I'm just wondering if there are any tools that you know of that are kind of quick and easy to use, that are like, I'm looking more for like a feasibility tool or something, just to make sure that everything is laid out, and when you're assessing who you want to play with, those things are thought of even ahead of time.
Yep.
So
For
I'm not
sure. Yeah. Jacqueline, you want to answer that?
We don't have any tools, although we've been subject to sponsor eligibility assessments numerous times, because they do have processes that they walk through. And with respect to regulated trials, the sponsor is the ultimate person responsible to Health Canada. So, you're right in that you want to engage with a site that has a qualified investigator, somebody who's got tons of experience doing research in that specific area. You want to look to make sure they've got standard operating procedures guiding their practice, that they've got staff that's got education and training. We've been asked to produce GCP and Health Canada training certificates. Sponsors typically ask for their standard operating procedures, CVs of the qualified investigators. But in terms of putting that into a form, I don't have one, because that's more on the sponsor side. But we can certainly see if there's something out there. But if you look, like specifically Section 5 of GCP talks about sponsor responsibilities. Mm-hmm. So that might, give you some sense of types of things that that you need to look for. And the other thing is like, the pharmacy, if you're going to engage and use pharmacy, what are the pharmacy setup like? Is an appropriate pharmacist? Do they have trained pharmacists, lab accreditation, all accreditation certificates? Because essentially we're a vendor, really. So you have to do like vendor qualification review and take all those things into consideration. So short answer, that was long-winded, is no, I don't have the tool, but
okay, no, and that's really helpful. Like, I think some of those things you mentioned are not really the obvious things, but those are the things that we would think about in terms of making sure that we pick partners. But then I'm also noticing that once you kind of go through the real obvious stuff, like, making sure someone has the training, and is the more the day-to-day stuff, like, and it was mentioned earlier, like, even though they're really keen to do it, but do they have the time to dedicate? And, do they then say, oh, you need that much space? Well, we don't really have the space to accommodate, it's those little kind of nuances that I was kind of hoping that there would be a little tool somewhere to kind of look at some of those things, or remind us to have those conversations to make sure that you don't get too far down the rabbit hole and then come to find out afterwards that then things are kind of being delayed because, as within a hospital, it's great if someone might want to do it, but at the end of the day, it's not just about them. It's about, the space and about planning and
it's a physical location.
And Carrie, I think you have really good plan in your, you really have looking at the right direction for sure, because it really it's looking at reviewing the qualification that's written on paper and certificate is one thing. It's really important, obviously, and necessary, but there's other factors that really could impact, such as, like you said, time availability. So what we are being asked as a potential site assessment is that, we're being asked how many active trials or how many active projects are available at this time and how many upcoming. So, obviously we won't be releasing any specific information, but we can, just to give them an idea of what would the workload is going to be like, on top of what's already existing. And there's availability of a staff. So how many coordinators, how many assistants are there to provide support? And all these other factors really play an important, it really influences overall performance, really. And we have to really think about communication skills as well. As you communicate with your potential site, do you get how long does it take for them to get back to you? That's kind of important too, because you don't want to be sending multiple emails with no response and just kind of delays the whole process. And there's a lot of things that need to be considered for sure.
If I find something old, Carrie, that I have that I can, modify and de-identify and take off any branding, I'll send it over, because I've been here forever. So I probably have something in the archives that would just give you a sense of what the questions that sponsors ask.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate that. Like, I'm starting to put something together, but if instead of reinventing the wheel, I thought if someone knew us to kind of even give a skeleton, that's great. Thank you very much.
Carrie, you did.
Go ahead.
Carrie, you did bring up very nice points. I had been answering those feasibility questionnaires for pretty much every sponsor protocol for our side. And I see that most situations, this is delegated to the study coordinator or a manager or someone else on the team. And the investigators usually do a very small portion in the feasibility, which is more applicable to the patient population. But there's this whole huge, just like Jacqueline was mentioning, the questions cover everything. Critical equipment from pharmacy storage and the resources and other departments that are required for the protocol, and even REB, how often they meet and everything. And if we had any recent inspections, it covers all kinds of questions. So I think I can share a template with Jacqueline too to share with you, because every sponsor has their own template, again, depending on the protocol. And lately these have been done electronically now through, if you're used to doing SIP, you have these feasibility questionnaires through SIP or LabCorp. All of them, they have their own platforms, and they're all electronic nowadays.
That'd be great. I did notice in the comments that Dominic mentioned that she also has a document. So she was going to try and copy and paste it, but if not, perhaps she can filter it through Jacqueline or Stella. That'd be great. Thanks so much. really, really helpful.
Yeah, you're
I'm
welcome.
trying, it's a PDF file and I'm trying to copy it in the message, but I'm not having any luck.
Oh, send it to me, Dominic. I can maybe I
sure-
can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a feasibility form from 3CTN. Is it 3CTN? I can't remember. Yeah, 3CTN. There may be sections in there. Here, I'm going to forward it to you, Stella. You're maybe a little bit more
Yeah.
techie than me.
Yeah, but they're
And then-
pretty standard, and they will drill
Yeah.
down to your space
Yeah.
and resources.
I wonder, because we do have a copy of the vendor qualification survey thing that we
Yeah.
have. So that might be something that, you know, good reference to carry as well. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. All right. Do you want to? Can you flip it back over to me, Stella?
Sure, I will stop sharing here.
And Stella, I send it to you by email. If
Thank you.
don't know if, yeah, like I said,
Yeah.
I wasn't able to copy it in the conversation, but maybe you will.
No worries.
Or
Yeah.
I'll send it by email after.
Yeah. Mhm.
So
Oops. Sorry, guys. Don't look. All right. Can you see that now? Is it okay? Are you on mute, Stella?
No. Did I share something?
Can I see it?
What do you
Did
see?
I think,
I see just
Just-
a black screen.
yeah, not your screen though.
Okay.
We'll use Zoom next week, guys.
How's that? Is that
No, still just your picture and Stella's picture.
okay? Because for me, I see my PowerPoint.
You do? Oh.
I do.
okay.
Great. And if I can't get it up there, then I'll just maybe Stella, you can.
I can, yeah. Did you want me just share the? I can share, but okay, I don't know. All right, I can do it, I guess. See that?
Yes.
You can
see
see
it?
it now.
Yes, it's
Informed
informed consent.
Informed consent.
Yeah,
Perfect.
informed
I think I've
consent,
got it, Stella.
No, this is what I shared.
Oh, my screens are working. Okay, never mind.
Okay, you want to try again?
You close
gonna-
out,
I will close out. Yeah, I'm closed out now. Yeah,
and now what do you see?
I see you.
Okay. All right, I'm going to stop and I'm going to go back to you. So you go ahead.
Okay. Strange.
Sorry, guys. I knew this would happen.
So while Jacqueline's doing that, Stella, another interesting point about your about the documentation of correspondence is that it was really like apparent to me, like it just was a reminder for me in terms of keeping all correspondence well documented, is because at the beginning of the Theranos trial, when it started, I guess it was like end of August or September, is they went through every single item of correspondence, from text messages, emails from everybody, and all of their correspondence came out in the trial.
Wow.
It was impressive, actually. So of course, I mean, I've always kept everything anyway, but just an example of like the value of keeping everything,
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when there's a Health Canada inspection and you're missing, for some reason, that you're missing, documented evidence of a certain involvement of investigator, maybe the email communication might be the only thing that's available to provide the proof. I mean,
Right.
hopefully not, but could be that. So yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that they went all the way down to like it was text messages mostly, like with the with Elizabeth Holmes as the CEO and stuff like that, but they used everything.
Okay. Jacqueline, I'm
Yeah.
sharing the screen. You want to just go ahead and you can tell me when to advance the slide. Is that okay with you?
Sure. I can't see your slides though. How come I can't see you?
You can't see me.
I can see I can see you. I can't see your slides.
Okay.
Oh, this is getting frustrating.
Okay.
So maybe
If they
you
can
have
see
to request control, maybe, Jacqueline. I don't know. Maybe
I think she has a
Um,
control.
yeah.
Close, open the slides, then reshare again. Maybe that'll work sometimes.
I have them open and okay.
These are technology issues from your
Yep.
World War II bunker.
Oh my gosh, you have no idea. This is so frustrating for me.
Do you have multiple screens? Or do you have one screen?
No, I only have, okay, wait. No, it won't let me do it. So do you want to put yours up?
Okay.
Can you, what do you see now when you look at it? Just me?
I see you, but I'm also sharing a screen. Do you guys see that?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can see informed consent.
Yeah, we can see the screen.
I don't know why
Except Jacqueline.
I can't see it. So let's just start. Like I'll just go over it really quickly because we just want to, talk about the principles of informed consent, and we only have 20 minutes left. So really it's just a sort of a broad overview. So if you want to go to next slide, Stella, the definition of informed consent. So this is the ICH GCP definition in section 1.28, and it's a pretty technical definition, but it's basically states that it's a process by which a subject voluntarily confirms his or her willingness to participate in a particular trial after having been informed of all aspects that are relevant to their decision to participate. And informed consent is documented by means of written, signed, and dated informed consent form. So you can see how recently we've been impacted by that particular statement in GCP where it says written, signed, and dated, because we've had to invoke different kind of modalities to get informed consent, in order to avoid direct contact with participants. But we can talk about that a little later, and we touch on that. So next slide for the purpose of informed consent. So really it's first and foremost to respect that autonomy, that principle of autonomy, and it's to ensure that we protect our research participants, whether they be actual patients or healthy volunteers, and to ensure that they clearly understand the benefits and the risks associated with their participation in the study, and that potential research subjects get all the information that they need in order to make an informed decision and decide whether or not they want to participate. Okay, so on to next slide. So informed consent is a process, and something to think about is, are you actually obtaining consent, or is a patient giving you consent? And is there really a meaningful distinction between the two? And the other thing we want to think about too is, when does the consent process begin and when does it end? So, I mean, in terms of actually meeting the requirements, the guidelines, and the regulation, it's always from the perspective of obtaining informed consent. But in terms of the patient-centric approach, we want to ensure that they really feel as though they are informed enough that they are giving us, their voluntary consent, and that they are willingly providing us with consent to enroll them in this research study. So it really is a process, and it starts actually with having that initial conversation about even, if you have a potential trial that's up and running at your site, and even engaging with them and advertising it. It kind of starts with that. It starts with the recruitment process, whether it's an active recruitment, you're talking to them, or like I said, you've got posters or flyers around. So it's that first information, and then consent, actually getting consent from them when there's somebody who's expressed an interest and meets all of the eligibility requirements to participate in the study. And then there's the process itself. So what does it look like? And we really want to focus more on the applicability of it today and not necessarily theoretical, because these are things that are going to help you day to day when you're actually faced with, or when you're delegated that responsibility of getting informed consent. So next slide. So it first starts with planning the informed consent process. So is this a responsibility that's been delegated to you? And if it is, then, it's your responsibility to have the appropriate training with respect to informed consent. If you need additional training, Stella does individual training sessions on getting informed consent. And so if you are the person that's responsible, at which point do you get invited to the patient's circle of care? There's different circumstances around who we consider to be part of a patient circle of care so that they can access, health information in order to approach a patient. Typically, research is seen as outside of the circle of care. So if a principal investigator has hired a research assistant specifically for recruitment of participants to the trial from their own patient population, the principal investigator would have to ask the patient first if they agree to have their contact information sent to the research coordinator or the research assistant for them to then follow up. With one of the only exceptions still is with oncology research, and it's because oncology research is so embedded into the clinical practice that the clinical research team, typically in oncology hematological areas, are really more involved at that patient level. So, although they still have to respect privacy and confidentiality, it's probably more appropriate for the PI to include the research assistant early, and so they can go and have a conversation with the patient about participation in a trial. There's a guidance document that Horizon has. It's a physician guide to privacy, and it's on Skyline. I can send it the link for anybody that's interested, but research and circle of care is one of the case studies that's talked about if anybody's interested. Okay, next slide. So you find it challenging to meet potential study participants. This is always an issue, is trying to recruit your numbers. So what you can do in that circumstance is you can invoke a tool called the permission to be contacted for research participation. And so if you're a research person that's completely outside of the circle of care, you can have this form, and Stella has an example of it, of a template where different groups have been using it lately. It's a tool to say, I give permission to so-and-so, who would be your circle of care person, to give my name and contact information to a research team to be contacted to be a participant in a research study. So if you're interested in something like that, let Stella know. We've used it. Cardiac surgery uses it now, where the cardiac nurse specialists see the patients first, and they get them to sign off on this permission form. And a couple of other departments have used it as well. So it's just a form that kind of stays on their file, and you're given a copy of it, and that means that you can then reach out to participants and give them information about a research study that they might be eligible for and interested in.
Jacqueline, I'm assuming that if we do use this process, we'd have to go back to REB and put an amendment in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if it wasn't part of your initial submission, yes, absolutely. Yeah. So next slide, please, Stella. So planning the informed consent process, just continuing on with that. So you want to consider your patient population, time consideration, multiple things that you want to take a look at. And what you're doing here is considering how much time it's going to take you. Is it a complex trial? Is it a relatively straightforward trial? Back in the olden days when we could do things face to face, where are you actually going to have this discussion? Do you need a separate room? Can you do it in the physician's office? Do you have time? Do you have space? We've all been sort of at least in St. John, moved around. So I know, some of the clinical touch point areas that we used to use to do informed consent are no longer available. So that just creates that, that physical limitation factor. And actually sitting down with somebody and getting informed consent in a nice, quiet, secluded, private area where you want to have that conversation. You might want to use additional tools too to explain, because some of these trials can be really complex. We have oncology trials that have consent forms that are 35 pages long. As there, ancillary things you can use, such as, pictures, diagrams. If you're working with a sponsor, they usually have some really nice tools to help describe the study in more lay language that's friendly, because I find that sponsor studies, clinical trial through pharmacy studies, the consent forms are written by their legal department, so they're really hard to understand, even though we try to bring them down to a readability level of, if they're grade 8 or grade 9, and they really should be a grade 6. If you can think of ways that might improve their comprehension so that they fully understand what it is they're participating in, then, you can submit those things to REB and work with your sponsor to try to create more patient-friendly tools. Next slide. So the process itself is for you to provide provide information to the participant. So that would be in the form of the informed consent document, and again, any ancillary tools that might help to explain what the study's about. You need to give them time to consider the information. I know some patients come in, they see the physician for their clinical appointment, they can meet with the research assistant. The research assistant can give them the document and send them away with it, and set up a time to follow up with them in the future to review the document, and so that when they come back in the next time, they're prepared or feel prepared that they can sign off on the informed consent document. You need to be able to respond to their questions. So you need to have an understanding enough of the study that you're able to answer any questions they may have. And of course, medical questions should be or can be responded to by the principal investigator. You need to ensure that they understand. I mean, this stuff is, how do you do that, right? Like, how do you ensure that they understand? Like, do you get them to give back to you a lay summary of what they understand their participation means? You can do that. Sometimes you'd be surprised at some of the responses that you get. But I would say that that's probably the quickest way to do it is, I'm asking you to be in the study. You say you want to do it. Tell me what it is you think you're going to be doing if you're enrolled in this study. What does that mean for you? Obtain their voluntary agreement to participate. That is as witnessed by the signature on the informed consent document. And that there's no, like, when you give them enough time and you give them enough questions. And the other thing to consider too is, who is getting informed consent? Is it somebody who's involved in their care? And some institutions will refuse to allow the principal investigator to actually get informed consent because they're afraid of what's called therapeutic misconception. And that means that, a patient might inappropriately think that the study is obviously safe for them to participate in because their physician is suggesting it to them. So, the physicians have to be wary and careful of that. And the Declaration of Helsinki speaks to this about these competing interests. So, as primary care provider of these patients, they have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the patient. That competes with research, which it's in the interest of science. So these two competing principles, you need to mitigate the risk to the patient that they fall sort of in between this competition. And that's usually when you would put a research coordinator in that role to get informed consent, so the patients don't feel potentially that there's any coercion for them to participate in the study, or any false sense of security by saying, well, if my doctor thinks it's okay, it must be okay. So hopefully that makes sense. And then you need to continue to provide information as required. So throughout the informed consent process, if anything changes, you need to be able to go back to the patient and say, some new information has come to light. Has this impacted your decision to continue participating in the trial? So that is really it's called, I don't know, Nancy Oliveira, you guys can read about her, but she was a physician who did a number of trials, and she worked with a pharmaceutical company who would not allow her to give negative trial results back to the research participants. So now there's a statement to say that any new information that might come to light that might impact their decision to participate in the trial needs to be given to them. And it's also a result of Tuskegee as well, because as we know, Tuskegee experimentation, penicillin became widely available, and they didn't tell the participants that it could have treated their syphilis, and some of them went on to suffer really severe health consequences then with their family. So it's kind of that principle that it's based on. Okay, next one. The consent form itself. The elements, I'm not going to go through them all individually, but there's section 4.8.10 in GCP, but I will tell you one practical point is when Health Canada comes, they have their checklist. They take out GCP 4.8.10 and make sure all of those sections are in your informed consent document. So make sure they're all there, and if you follow our templates, our sponsor templates, preferably ours, all your essential elements will be there. Next slide. The documentation. So it's important to document date and time that informed consent was obtained. And these are all the things that you need to, that really you should be documenting. And I think, Stella, you have a template, don't you? That'll let you check that off. But
yes, I have several different versions of a template. If anybody's interested, let me know.
Yeah. So, because these are all the things that Health Canada is going to look for too, right? When you got it, and what are they looking for here? To make sure that you haven't done any study-related procedures before you got informed consent, unless, of course, they're, fasting bloods or something like that, and you have to write a note to file about all that stuff. So we can share the template with you to make sure all those elements are documented and captured with respect to informed consent. Okay, next, remote consent. We want to talk about this a little bit because as I referred to back earlier, where it said written or consent should be written, signed, and documented, or something like that. And as I said, we know that COVID-19 really kind of blew all that stuff up, and FDA was probably the first regulatory authority that issued documentation around alternate consent models. And then Health Canada sort of kind of reluctantly followed suit because they recognized that it was, ridiculous to put people at risk doing face-to-face written informed consent documents. So they did come out with some guidelines around how you could still manage to meet the regulations while invoking a different informed consent model. And we issued a standard operating procedure addendum. I think the addendums there, Stella, right, to SOP 20, is it 24 maybe? Or 11, yes, it's SOP 11.
11, yes.
Yeah, and then our updated guidance, COVID-19, the alternate consent models are in there as well. So you can take a look at those two things, but there's just a number of different considerations. So it is possible, and I know with R3 that different consent models are part of that new guidance too. So you can get it. You need to have impartial witness. Yeah. So I'm not going to go through because this slide is pretty dense as well. But I would refer you to Health Canada, our SOP 11, and our COVID-19 guidance document to really walk you through remote informed consent. And if you're not doing a regulated trial, there's different things that you can do too. You can get telephone consent, you can get verbal consent. All these alterations though need to be approved by the RAB. So just submit them, and it just needs to make sense for your study. Yeah, I mean, if you're doing a survey over the phone or something like that, it doesn't make sense to have face-to-face, in-person, and informed consent. So we can work with you to come up with something that's workable for you. And documentation, next slide. And so I think I just briefly touched on this, and there's a list on the right of all of our SOPs that are available for you to take a look at on our informed consent process. And we do have individual training available through Stella if you're interested in that, because it can be it's a delegated responsibility, but it's a really big responsibility to have that conversation with patients, particularly patients who are sick or find themselves in situations of vulnerability, to get them to, develop that kind of trust with you as a researcher to, hand over responsibility to you and for collecting their information and all those types of things. So if there's the least bit of concern, just reach out to Stella for that individual training on how to get informed consent. And next slide. Okay, so this is a question just to sort of close out the session. Then this is with respect to healthy volunteers. So they're considering participating in a research study, testing a new vaccine for Ebola. Oh Lord, that's all we need with COVID-19. He has left his glasses at home and is unable to read the informed consent form. According to E6, who must be present during the discussion of the informed consent?
Oh, C, an impartial witness.
Yeah, it's an impartial witness, and that's GCP section 4.8.9. And what the impartial witness though is attesting to is that the consent form was accurately explained to and apparently understood by the subject. So that's not just witness as to signature. They're saying that, yep, she understood, and the consent form was explained as it was written in the document. So that's a pretty heavy responsibility, and it doesn't just end there. So I mean, if you're going to have to give them materials throughout, they're going to need some assistance all along the way. So, and impartial witness would be an exception because our consent form template doesn't include impartial witness. So if you were going to use that or you anticipate you're going to use it in your population, then you would need to submit that to REB either with your initial application or as an amendment if the situation comes up. And I think that's it. And I apologize for it's me, obviously, with my lack of technical abilities relating to Teams. I do much better with Zoom, so I think we're going to switch to that platform for the next one.
Yeah, next one, definitely, guys. I will send out invite through Zoom link. Hopefully that make things a little bit easier next time. As you know, next session is scheduled for next Friday, so December 3rd at 12. About 2 hours. And yeah, well, thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions before we go?
And they get SOCR points too, right?
Yes, I will be issuing the training certificate with CE Hour. So yeah.
I have a quick question, Stella. There was a lot of amazing resources that you mentioned that you could share. Do you want us to reach out to you specifically, or will you proactively just send all the things you talked about in one email, or do you want us to ask specifically for the ones we're looking for?
I don't mind sending them out like as a group email. Yeah, that should be fine. I can do that. Yeah, maybe sometime next week or so, I'll send out maybe a copy of the presentation slide deck, as well as some of the forms that are mentioned in the slides. If there's additional things that you are looking for, let me know as well, by all means. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question for Jacqueline. Hi. Yeah, this is about the remote informed consent. I think we adapted this during the pandemic phase. Is it fine for us now that Health Canada also has approved? Can we implement that into our routine SOPs, or is it still kept only for pandemic guidance?
That's a great question. Let me go back to Health Canada because they sometimes issue guidance quietly, and I don't always see it, so I'll have to purposely go and check to see if what they're asking for now. But they're working on R3, so they recognize that it was a limitation. So, but yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that we should go back, right? But I'll double check for you, Merdula, just to make sure.
Merdula, I just wonder what was the sponsor's perspective on that? Have you had a chance to discuss that moving forward?
About remote consenting?
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the sponsors have already moved on to electronic consenting, and they are willing to provide so many things. So they are fine with that. Actually, they have so many other apps. Some of the sponsors are encouraging patients to log into their own websites to understand the trial better. And there's so much going on from sponsors. And
I think that's good. I mean, if they can, because if they're just looking at a portal and getting information, there's no security. It's only when they start uploading information. But even for electronic consent, I mean, we would look at that just because it's more kind of interactive with patients and it's more right. I think it's just a better process. So yeah, for sure.
Have you had any issues with people, like, say, not having internet or having issues with internet connection, or even not being familiar with the use of a computer? Because the cardiac rehab group mentioned, like, this isn't for research yet, but potentially down the line. Merdula or Jacqueline, have you experienced that at all? And if so, like, what did you do about it as alternatives?
I haven't, but I haven't personally, but it goes back, I guess, to that point we talked about is your population, right? When you're figuring out what your informed consent process is going to be like, and if you know that you've got, patients who are rural that don't have internet access or for whatever reason don't have access to that technology, because that comes to the principle of inclusion, that you can't purposely exclude somebody based on the fact that they don't have access, right? You want to avoid that. Yeah.
The other alternative, if they don't have internet access, is mailing them the protocol. Call them by phone and inform them that we are mailing it, and by physical mail.
Yeah, the consent form, right?
Yeah.
So do you do like an expedited overnight thing, or do you just like, and then do you just schedule a discussion with them once they've received it, kind of thing? Or
yeah, usually that's what however you send it out, but yeah, have a conversation over the phone and review it together.
Okay.
Yes, sorry, Merdula.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, call them first and then make sure that the address is right that we are using, mail it, and set up a time to discuss once they receive. And if they're fine, they sign and mail it back.
Yeah. Okay. Or bring it in with their next visit if it's not too far out. Or some people, if they actually do have people that have internet access, can take a picture of their signature and send that in. And there's all kinds of different ways you can do it. And so the other thing I wanted to mention was decentralized clinical trials. They're going to have to come up with a way not to to decentralize study visits too. We shouldn't be bringing people into the hospital, and we don't need to. So the consent process is going to have to change to reflect that too. The regulations are too strict right now. So so DCTs are a big topic right now.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that, Sarah, you mentioned that, because in the conference that I just recently attended, there was a cardiologist whose main patient population is, I think he's a cardiac surgeon. So he's patient population tend to be a little bit older, and that he was mentioning that whatever the future is when in clinical research, it really has to be focused on what patient really wants. So it will be most likely a mix of remote and in person, because as you said, some population actually prefer to have human contact, in person contact, and have a paper and pen given to them, like kind of old fashioned, but it works for them. So it really has to be tailored to what really is needed for that particular patient population. It can't be, one method fits all. Like
No.
it can't be that way for sure. No.
Yeah.
And DCTs too, I think, when I say that, I mean decentralized clinical trials. You want to look them up. I mean, there's quite a bit of movement around them and how to regulate them and oversee them and things like that. But I mean, I think E8 is going to take that into consideration, because if you're going to have patient partners are probably going to reflect that I don't want to come into the hospital 12 times in 6 months if you can do something remote. So I think there's going to be a big shift in the way we do clinical trials, and I think COVID-19 as horrible as it's been, is, sort of going to be the launch for actually making things more patient friendly and more patient centric.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Also, I want to ask if you changed the ICF template recently, because once we download the template, we continue working on all the projects using that template. So we might be missing something that you just changed now. So I just want to make sure that.
There is a new one, Radula. It's August 2021 is up there now on the website.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Yeah. All right. Well, I really appreciate the conversation, the dialogue, and you taking your time on a Friday afternoon to join us. And so we will see some of you next week if you want to join us then, and then you'll get your certificates based on your attendance for your points for SOCRA.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Thanks everyone for your time and attention. Okay.
Wonderful.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Hey, Jacqueline, you still online?
Oh, I am. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was very informative, and you condensed it within 2 hours. What was that trial that Sarah was talking about? Did they participate in that? Looks like it, because she said she stored all the.
Oh, I don't. I think that was a U.S. trial. It was based out of the States, and it's more device related. So I mean, Sarah has a real interest in devices because that's really the area that she works in. So yeah, I remember seeing it in the news, but
Because one of the conversations she mentioned, oh, it was good that we saved all the
you're still there?
information.
Oh,
I think it's just
oh,
you and me. And there's two others, I don't know. Natalia and Sarah. I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah, it's not Sarah, it's Sahira from our team.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was just wondering because that actually brought me a lot of things, because when we are looking at new sponsors reaching out, or CROs with whom we have never worked before, this is something to be really watchful about. And I know we definitely look for the NOLs and all, which cannot be just done. We have so many filters where we can pick this up, but that is really alarming to see how they could get away.
Well, I don't think the device oversight or regulations are strict in the U.S. I keep hearing that. I haven't really dove into the material around it, but I do know that there are issues because there was a big lawsuit probably about 10 years ago with BMP